Good morning in the US and good afternoon in Europe and in the Middle East. I'm delighted to be opening the annual Iran conference, held this year in cooperation with the Konnard Adenauer Stiftung Israel. This conference would typically be open to the public and overbooked. But this year, and under the current circumstances, it has been cut down in scale but not in quality. We have a first-rate participants, and let me open the first part of the conference. I'm honored to present the distinguished guest that Major General Amos Yadlin will interview. Ambassador John Bolton, former U.S. National Security Advisor and Ambassador to the UN, and Sir John Sawyers, former Chief of UK Secret Intelligence Service and currently Executive Chairman of New Bridge Advisory. In the second part of the conference, I will be moderating a distinguished panel that I will present later. Amos, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, John and John. Good morning in Washington. We are very glad to host you in the INSS conference dealing with where we're going vis-a-vis the Iran crisis. I will start first with John Bolton at Washington, a good friend, expert for non-proliferation and arm control, and served until lately as a national security advisor for the President of the United States. How you assess the success of this policy and how you are now will recommend the new administration to continue with it or to choose another policy. As we remember, the goals of the maximum pressure was to bring back Iran to the negotiation table to achieve a better agreement, or even if you aim higher, to make the regime collapse. How we are doing compared to these very ambitious goals?
Well, Amos, first, thank you very much for inviting me to participate. It's great to be with you, even if only virtually, and to see John Sawyers again. We had many dealings back in the day when we were both in our respective foreign ministries. I think the course of policy in the Trump administration is difficult to describe in a coherent way. It has a bumper sticker of maximum pressure, but in fact, I think, unfortunately, it was not applied with the consistency and persistence that really would be required either to change the behavior of the Ayatollahs in Tehran or to change the regime. I think that what motivated the president at the beginning was the fact that in the 2016 campaign, he had argued against the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. And for him, it had been a very successful argument as part of his effort to get the Republican nomination. But I don't think it was fixed to a larger strategy. Indeed, this is one of the problems of policy, quote unquote, in the Trump administration in a whole range of areas. So that although the effect of the reimposition of American sanctions on Iran has been very dramatic, far exceeding the estimates that those who supported the JCPOA made, who said, don't withdraw, your sanctions can't be effective, the multilateral sanctions prior to the deal weren't effective, you going out on your own can't possibly change things. I think the fact is the US sanctions and their reverberations around the world did have a dramatic effect. But the president didn't follow through in a consistent way with an aim either to change the behavior of the regime in Tehran or what I think in my personal view is the only way we're going to move Iran away from seeking nuclear weapons, which is to get a different regime in Tehran. And he sent mixed signals throughout in terms of wanting to deal with the Ayatollahs that ultimately led us to a series of unfortunate incidents that demonstrated to Iran that it was very hard to see what Trump would do on any given day, which is much the same way I felt during most of my time at the White House. So I think now the odds are that the incoming Biden administration will not change anything immediately, at least in a dramatic sense. I think they will find the Middle East is a very different place than when they left office at the end of the Obama administration. And I think they've got, I understand their position of wanting to get back into the JCPOA, but I think they're going to have to take a long, hard look at how to do that and what it actually means.
But once again, can you please, beside criticizing your own side, when you look at the Iranians, and you're absolutely right that sanctions were much more painful and effective than people thought. But what needed more to achieve the goals of regime collapse or regime change behavior or coming to agree to a better deal? What is missing? Only time?
No, I mean, I think there are several things I would just say very quickly. Number one, my experience with economic sanctions in a wide variety of contexts over a long number of years is that they are most effective when they are comprehensively applied, effectively simultaneously with full enforcement up to and including military force. And I think what we saw throughout the utilization of sanctions after the U.S. withdrawal from the deal in 2018 was a gradual application of sanctions that actually gave the Iranians time to mitigate some of the worst effects. Now, it wasn't, they didn't mitigate them all, that's for sure. But I think if we had imposed the sanctions in a more effective way, we'd be in a different place today, number one. And number two, I think the evidence is very clear that dissent within Iran is at an all-time level, really across all facets of society. The problem is that the regime still has the exclusive use of force, and that the United States and others didn't do anything to affect change in that, to fragment the leadership of the Quds force and the IRGC or the civilian aspects of the regime. I think there are ways to do that, and I think opposition to the regime is really stronger than people think. We may or may not be approaching a crisis of regime confidence when Khamenei dies. I don't necessarily believe the current rumors about his health any more than I believe the rumor once every couple of months that Kim Jong-un has died. One day those rumors will be true, but who knows when that will be. But I do think the regime is in weaker shape than is generally appreciated, and it's a tragedy. Really, we're not prepared to take advantage of it.
Thank you, John. And we move to Sir John Soares, former head of MI6, which I had the privilege to work with when I was chief of intelligence for the IDF. And you are bringing to us today the European perspective. This is more speaking about multilateralism, working together, and you will have, I think, a partner in the other side of the Atlantic Ocean who will share with you the same approach. What is your personal recommendations how to deal with Iran now that Iran is not in compliance with the JCPOA? And which kind of policy would you think will be best to stop an Iran?
Well, thank you, General Yadlin, and it's good to be on this panel with you and Ambassador Bolton. The acoustics are a bit unusual, so forgive me if I pause from time to time. I think the first thing to say is to underline where there are common agreements between Europeans and Americans. I'm not speaking on behalf of Europe. I'm not even speaking on behalf of Britain. I'm just giving a perspective from my own experience on this. And first of all, Iran poses is the source of the greatest threat in the Middle East region, much more so than terrorist organizations. Iran has the resources of a state behind it. And I think the highest priority for dealing with Iran is to deal with the gravest threat, which is that Iran acquires nuclear weapons. And we need to find a way to ensure, as European and American leaders have said consistently, that Iran never acquires such a weapon, because it would be used, not so much used as a weapon, but it would be used to change the balance of power in the region. And we in Britain have nuclear weapons. People accuse us, critics say they've never been used. I say our nuclear weapons are used every single day because they affect the calculations of our adversaries about how they deal with us. Now, it's hard to identify exactly what it is, but it changes the balance of power. And we need to avoid a situation where Iran has such weapons. And it's not the only source of the problem, because Iran also is causing serious problem in the neighborhood. It has done so for 20 years in Lebanon. It's had an ally in Damascus. And in the last 20 years, it's added Iraq, perhaps courtesy of the 2003 war, and now Yemen, perhaps courtesy of the missteps of the Saudis, to the list of areas where it has opportunities to expand its influence and play a greater role. So we have a common platform of analysis. And it's a question of how do we proceed from that common approach. I don't have as much skepticism as Ambassador Bolton does about the effectiveness of the Iranian of the measures in the Iranian nuclear deal. I think they were insufficient. I don't think the 2015 deal was anything like as strong, for example, as the 2004 provisional agreement that the Europeans concluded with Iran, which put an end to all nuclear enrichment and indeed all nuclear conversion of uranium hexafluoride in Iran. But we couldn't bring that home, partly because the US administration came late to that party, and partly because there was a change of political leadership in the presidency to Ahmadinejad. Now, back in 2004, we reckon that Iran was 2 to 3 years away from having a nuclear weapon. In 2015, it was 1 year away. Maybe if they implement the measures which they've announced since the killing of Fakhrizadeh, they will be only 6 months away from a nuclear weapon. That's not much. That's not very encouraging. We have to find a way not just to destroy Iranian facilities, but to try and build a path which ensures that Iran is not securing, making progress down the path to nuclear weapons, and at the same time, it has a pathway where it can normalize its relations in the region. We've seen in the past that Iran can reach agreements with us. For example, the 2001 Bonn Agreement on Afghanistan. For example, the 1989 agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia on Lebanon. Iran is a country you can do deals with, and the successive release of hostages, Western hostages from Iran, show that you can do that. Now, I think it's wrong to think that the only way forward is to destroy the Iranian regime. As we've seen elsewhere, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or the attempts in Syria and Yemen, when you go for that sort of wide-scale regime change, the response is usually chaos and collapse rather than a move to a more favorable liberal order. In some ways, the best example is Iraq, but that's because Western forces have taken the bulk of the punishment of dealing with the collapse of authority there. So I think we have to find a way to deal with this Iranian regime, and the highest priority is the nuclear issue.
But if you look forward, and from your music, I hear that you are not a full supporting of the maximum pressure. What will be your recommendation? And you are not representing a formal government, but if you were now in a position of decision. What track would you take? Another negotiation? Go back to the 2015 JCPOA, or you have some recommendation how to amend, how to close the loopholes?
Well, one of my lessons in life is you can never go backwards. You can never turn the clock back. Things are different. Actually, both Western interests and Iranian interests have been damaged by the last 4 or 5 years. And we will have to start with, there are some areas that have some agreement. I think some of the elements of the JCPOA are worth preserving. The timelines are far too short, they always were. There was no provisions on controlling Iranian missiles, and I think we need to find a way to limit the numbers and range of Iranian missile capability. And we need to find solutions to regional issues. Yemen is the most obvious one, the one crying out for a solution. And we need to find a way forward in Iraq as well, so that Iran doesn't have a baleful influence on that country. I think all those are possible. I think if we end up simply with maximum pressure, we will not find a path to agreements. The Iranians are a proud people, and they are surrounded by what they see as hostile powers. I think we need to somehow build a way forward, not some sort of feeble best endeavors approach, but hard negotiations which are verified in their outcome, and which solve these practical issues step by step, and which has a possibility of building some degree of trust. Now, I suspect Ambassador Bolton will take a different view from that, but I think what I'm saying would broadly reflect the views of European countries. I suspect it probably reflects the views of some of those in the Biden administration, but we've yet to hear them really speak out on this beyond some of the remarks that the president-elect himself has made in his recent public comments.
Before I move back to the Ambassador Bolton, you described a comprehensive approach towards the threat of Iran, the nuclear, the ballistic missiles, and their regional behavior. I hardly see the Iranians willing to come to negotiate on the nuclear issue. And they are saying we are not moving from 2015 agreement, and the Americans will pay compensation on the time that they impose sanctions on us. What will be your position if the Iranians will continue to say, this is our position, we are not coming to negotiate?
Well, I do think that, as I say, both sides have been, to some extent, scarred by the last 4 years. We have some additional leverage. The sanctions that the United States has imposed provide some extra leverage for the Biden administration to use, and I think it's something to use wisely, not just to give away. And I know from my own dealings with Iran, I was our chief negotiator with the Iranians from 2003 to 2007. And I then served on the UN Security Council, where we tightened the pressure on Iran through a series of Security Council resolutions. And then obviously I followed Iran closely, although I didn't have contacts with them, whilst I was chief of intelligence service. You can, a country's public position, especially a country like Iran, is very different from its private negotiating position. You have to manipulate the space between those cracks. Iran has its own politics. Iran is it's not an open society. It's certainly not a democracy. But there are groups within Iran that negotiate and maneuver against one another as a battle for power. It's not like Saudi Arabia. It's not like Iraq under Saddam Hussein. It's a complex society where there are political pressures which either expand and open opportunities or close them down. And we need to be skillful in how we deal with that and how we exploit it.
Can you refer to a future development and positions vis-a-vis a very tough Iranian position?
You mean from the perspective of the Biden administration?
Yeah. Difficult for you.
Not that they consult with me about what they're going to do, but I do believe that there is an awareness among Biden's advisors, as John was just saying. I think there is in Europe too. The 2015 deal, leaving its own merits aside for a minute, and I'd be happy to come back and explain yet again why I didn't favor it, but leaving those aside, it was incomplete in many respects, and we've just seen the tension really played out in an inartful way, but the tension arising over the expiration of the UN Security Council conventional arms embargo against Iran, which was a concession made in the negotiations for the 2015 deal, but by the West, by the US and the Europeans, that never should have been made, never should have been made. I don't see how you can convince the Iranians to come back in and say, okay, we will agree as part of a comprehensive settlement to a conventional arms embargo. I don't see it. I also don't see any comparable carrot that the Europeans and the Biden administration will have to the unfreezing of Iranian assets that was an important part of the economic relief afforded to Iran in 2015. Estimated to be between 120 and 150 billion dollars. It's a hard number to pin down, but it was certainly a lot of money that helped put Iran back in a stronger economic footing, and that financed a lot of its conventional military activity and its support for terrorism. So the Biden administration is going to have, I think, difficulty recreating the magic that led to the 2015 deal. And I think that Iran's support for terrorism in the region, and maybe more importantly than anything else, its conventional military activity in Iraq, in Syria, linking up with Hezbollah in Lebanon, has changed the dynamic in the region to such an extent that a nuclear deal alone, even if it were reachable, would seem significantly inadequate. And I just end with one last point. Obviously, the diplomatic recognition that's been exchanged between Israel on the one hand, Bahrain and the UAE on the other, with possible other Arab states coming, is an indication of the growing convergence of strategic assessments about the threat that Iran poses in the region. And unlike 2015 and the run-up, the negotiations running up to the 2015 deal, I don't think either Israel or many of the key Arab states are going to be restrained in expressing their concern about trying to recreate the 2015 deal. In 2015, they were largely silent, maybe complaining a little bit behind the scenes. I don't see that this time. I think they're going to take a much more active and public role against a deal they would see threatening their own interest.
Trying to clarify, you advocate a comprehensive agreement on, it's the same question I gave to Sir John Soros. Nuclear, ballistic missile, regional behavior. If somebody will tell you, we can fix the nuclear deal according to Ambassador Bolton's demands, leave the rest because the comprehensive agreement cannot be reached, it's too complex, it's too long of negotiation. We fix the nuclear issue, which is the more of concern, and we deal with our national mechanism power with the Iranian terrorists, with the Iranian proxies, with the rest of the Iranians' malign behavior. Would you take this policy?
No, I would not, because it's not simply Iran's indigenous capacity to create deliverable nuclear weapons. Something I have worried about for a long, long time is the Iranian connection with North Korea. So in answer to the question, how long would it take Iran to get nuclear weapons? The answer is a couple of weeks. How long does it take to load several warheads onto a North Korean tramp steamer and fill it up with fuel and send it on its merry way toward an Iranian port? That's how long it takes. And that's why fundamentally it's the regime itself that's the problem. It's not the weaponry. That's bad enough, that's for sure. But it's the nature of the regime that we're dealing with.
Can I just add, Ambassador General Yadlin, I don't think a single comprehensive agreement covering all those areas is likely to be achieved in one go. I think it's too much for American politics to absorb, too much for Iranian politics to absorb, however desirable each of the components may be. I think we're more likely to make progress if we divide them up. Now, yes, there's a case for linking missiles to the nuclear portfolio, but I think if you try to add in all the regional issues into a single comprehensive agreement, that's a recipe for failure. I share John Bolton's concerns about Iran's other options. I too have been worried that cooperation with North Korea might enable them to completely short circuit their nuclear development timelines. I'm also concerned about the wider strategic picture. You have a situation in Iran which there'll be a change to new leadership when Ayatollah Khamenei dies or steps down. You have a strategic partnership developing between China and Iran. You have, I'm sorry to say, it's a Trump administration negotiating the return of Afghanistan to the Taliban, who will be in the hands of, under the influence of the Iranians as well. You have a risk of a large proportion of the Eurasian landmass coming under serious sort of hostile, Russia would back it as well, hostile powers to the West. We need to try to ensure Iran doesn't end up in that grouping. And I think over the next 20 or 30 years, we are likely to see the decline of the oil-rich countries in the region, simply because the price and value of oil is going to steadily decline, price and volumes of oil. The most important powers in the region are likely to be Turkey and Iran. And we want them both on the West side. And we need to find a pathway to keep Turkey with us and gradually over the next 20 years to use exploit the openness to the extent that there is any openness in Iran to our own advantage and not rely heavily on countries which I'm sorry to say they're good friends of ours in the Gulf, including Saudi Arabia, but do not have a great future because they are very dependent upon one resource. And only one country in the region, the UAE, has made any real progress towards diversifying its economy.
So you touch on China, and there are two different school of thought about how important is the strategic agreement that China and Iran achieved lately. Some are saying this is an old agreement, they just reaffirm it, nothing is there. The Chinese will be very, very cautious because they need their connection with the Saudis. They depend on Saudi oil, and they will not need Iran as the main ally vis-a-vis the United States in the Middle East. And others are saying this is the future of the Middle East, alliance between Iran and China against US, Israel, Western, pro-Western regimes. How you see it from your perspective?
From my perspective, I think we need to take it fairly seriously. I don't think China is a natural partner for the Iranians. Culturally, they tend to look more either to the West or to India. But if they have no other option, they will turn to China. For China, there's a big advantage here. And China is essentially a land power. Yes, it has aspirations to push America back into the sea, but essentially their focus is on being the dominant power in the Eurasian landmass. That's what the Belt and Road Initiative is all about. I think their strategic vision is that, and this is something that Henry Kissinger has described before, their strategic vision is that the United States will remain a great power, but it should be an island power, separated from the rest of the world by two oceans. And China should be a land power, the dominant power on the Eurasian landmass. That affects us Europeans very directly because we're the other end of that landmass. And Belt and Road is designed step by step to acquire countries that pay their primary tribute, if you like, as the Chinese put it, pay tribute to Beijing and are brought into line by China's economic power rather than by military means, but nonetheless increases China's dominance. And I think Iran is a very important step on that. They stand right on the path of the Belt and Road, and to bring Iran into China's camp will be a massive strategic gain for China. And the Iranians, I don't think it's their first choice, but if it's their only choice, it's one they will take.
Ambassador Bolton, I think one of the only bipartisan issue in Washington today is the great power competition, or even looking at China as even as an enemy. How you interpret the Chinese and the Russians supporting Iran and making every move, diplomatic or other moves against Iran, much more difficult when the two superpowers supporting Iran?
Yeah. Well, look, China is a huge issue. You should have another conference on China. John and I can come back and talk about it then. But I'll just say, with respect to China's recent announcement with Iran, I think there's less there than meets the eye. What China wants is oil, and their green credentials are a lot less than anybody else watching. I don't think they care so much. They are an energy deficit country in a very significant way. And, you know, Deng Xiaoping, when he was introducing capitalist economic reforms in China, said it doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. And I think China's view here is we don't care whether the oil comes from Iran or Saudi Arabia. We want every option we can get to get oil from whatever source we can to feed the demand of our economy. So I think they're playing with their customary long-term approach to strategy. It's not like they've abandoned their contacts with the Gulf Arab countries, which are perpetually disturbing to the United States. I think this is a very complex, long-term issue here, and to me, it's a further reinforcement of the mistake that America makes, as it did in the Obama administration when he wanted to pivot toward Asia, to pivot away from the Middle East. Mistake the Trump administration has made repeatedly for 4 years, most recently in the president's announcement of drawing down American forces in both Iraq and Afghanistan to 2,500 apiece. Those are numbers that have zero military significance. In Afghanistan, obviously, the very troubling negotiations with Afghanistan. It's not, you can't say, well, we're just going to worry about China. We don't have to worry so much about the Middle East. The United States has to worry about everything. That's our lot in life, and if we don't, we're going to find a problem somewhere.
Ambassador Bolton, you were, I think, near the president when he decided on assassination of Qasem Soleimani. And America used a kinetic power. It seems like an exception, because usually the Americans in the last decade thinking that any military action is by definition a slippery slope with unintended consequences into a full-scale war. What is the lesson learned from the Qasem Soleimani assassination? And America took responsibility to this action. And if you add to it General Farkhizadeh, who had the secret military program of Iran, military program for the nuclear bomb, how you assess these operations in the general strategy vis-a-vis Iran?
Well, Amos, I'll try and answer that, obviously, without any reference to the specifics of Soleimani or Fakhrizadeh. And of course, I don't know who's responsible for Fakhrizadeh. Maybe you have more information than I do on that subject. But I would just say this: I think the decision on Soleimani was the correct decision, and I think it's justified for many reasons, well beyond the current tensions between the United States and Iran. To me, it goes back to the Iranian involvement with predecessors of Hezbollah who bombed the Marine barracks in Lebanon in 1983 and who are responsible for the deaths of scores of Americans in Iraq from explosively formed projectiles and other Iranian efforts, which they knew in aiding Shia militia and other groups in Iran, which they knew would kill Americans, and continues today with their support for Taliban activities in Afghanistan aimed at NATO forces there. I think what's interesting here, despite the concerns that people have about the use of force and what it may lead to, not every use of force does lead to a slippery slope. And in fact, for all of the bluster of the Iranians and for all of the capabilities they do have in the Quds force, which I don't underestimate, if you add Soleimani together with the range of attacks on Iranian nuclear and ballistic missile facilities over the past year and the attack on Fakhrizadeh, we have seen essentially no effective Iranian retaliation. And we have seen proof that all the world can see that Iran is very vulnerable to targeted use of force from the outside. I think this has to shake the regime to its very foundations and is a further sign that if we were doing this right, the regime itself would shatter. Now, I don't expect that to happen in the Biden administration, but I think that that there are splits within the Iranian leadership. I'd like to find ways to exploit them better, but I don't think that regime is anywhere near as solid as they would like to believe.
On the same subject, Sir John, can you refer to the fact that whoever assassinated General Fakhrizadeh haven't targeted only him. He basically looked into the outgoing administration, what they will do if the Iranian will retaliate soon, and what the next incoming administration will find on his desk after some escalation that will happen. What is your view about it?
Well, my view is that the norm of international relations is we don't kill people we disagree with. And any such assassinations have to be extremely well justified and isolated. Now, I wondered what the Iranian reaction to the Soleimani killing was going to be. I share some of John Bolton's analysis of the background to it and the fact that the Iranians did not respond directly. They have no wish to take on the full power of American might any more than Saddam Hussein did, and learned to his cost what the outcome would be. But the Iranians have shown over the last year that they too have precision capabilities. The strike on Abqaiq was very damaging and potentially hugely disruptive. I agree with John that the Abraham Accords between Israel and the UAE are a welcome step, and there's a hugely beneficial effect for Israel. Not sure how beneficial yet they're going to be for the UAE, because they've added to the scope for the UAE to be a target of Israel in any response in the way that the Saudis were before. That is something which we'll have to see how it moves forward. The Iranians are very skillful at asymmetric responses. They will not seek a like-for-like response to the attacks that they are under. They will seek ones which make it more difficult for the other side, and they will choose their own timing. I do think, though, that the Europeans will all say that the Fakhrizadeh killing was illegal. I don't think the illegality is really the central issue of it. I think the central issue is what sort of response does it prompt. I think if we go down the road of a world where individuals are increasingly assassinated because we disagree with them or we don't like what they're doing, I think that's quite a dangerous world. It's the role that the Russians and the Saudis occupy, and it's not really the world that the West wants to be in, and I don't think it's the one which, frankly, Israel should want to be in either.
Okay, we are towards closing. So I give you a free closing sentence, and if you don't have one, let's go to December 2021. Can you see JCPOA 2.0 signed by a year from now?
Well, I'll take the first shot. I don't think there will be a JCPOA 2.0 by that point. I think that it's going to be much more complicated. I think to the extent Iran may be preparing a response to the Fakhrizadeh killing, they're going to wait until after January the 20th. And I think the whole region is a lot more complicated than they see coming in. I think that the geostrategic shifts that are taking place that the Abraham Accords represent are simply going to continue. I think the Gulf Arabs' strategic assessment of the Iranian threat, not just nuclear, but conventional and terrorist as well, is growing increasingly close to Israel's. And while it may surprise a lot of people, it turns out the Palestinians are not actually uppermost in the minds of the Gulf Arabs. They are uppermost in their own minds. And so that tendency is going to continue. I think it's still worth efforts for the United States and the Europeans to see if they can't reach agreement, not necessarily that, as I think what John and I have said shows, it's not showed that will be easy, but notwithstanding the Trump administration, I still think it's worth a try. And I think that as long as we never forget that the real objective here is to make sure Iran never gets nuclear weapons, hopefully we'll find a way to get together.
Well, as a last word on this, and thank you for giving us the opportunity, it's good to be able to agree with almost everything that John has just said. I too don't think there will be JCPOA 2.0 in a year's time. I don't rule it out for 2 years' time, but a lot of things will have to fall into place for that to happen. But what I would say is that in the short term, it's always easier to use force to destroy things, to kill people. The harder task, that's the easy option basically. The harder task in life is to build bridges, to build trust, and create an environment where people live at peace with one another. And I think the long-term interest of our Gulf friends, of Israel, and of certainly of Europeans is a world which is ruled by a degree of legality and legitimacy and some level of mutual respect. Now, the Iranians are the ones who are way out of line on all these issues, but we need to find a way to bring them back into line. And I don't believe regime collapse or regime change will actually do that. I suspect it will be, there will be a successor regime would be even more violent and more repressive than the current one.
Thank you both. Ambassador Bolton and Sir John, it's remind me the good old days that we worked together in official positions, fighting against huge challenges, but doing it together from different perspective. Each one of us serve his own country, but I think we shared in the past, and we are still sharing the same values and the same interests, and continuing with trusting each other. And this is very, very important. I really take on you, John Bolton, your promise to come and attend another INSS event on a great power competition. And Sir John, with his experience and insights, will be also very welcome. So good afternoon for everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amos. Thank you, John.
Good afternoon. I'm excited to open our panel dealing with Iran approaching the year 2021 in anticipation to a new administration in Washington, as well as after several months, a new administration in Tehran, elections for president in June 21. The last year was a year of I would say, one of the most difficult years that the Islamic Republic has faced since its establishment 41 years ago. The year has started with the implications of the killing of Soleimani, the downing of the Ukraine airplane, and the demonstration that started after it. It continued with the dramatic corona pandemic, which Iran is suffering more than any other country in the Middle East. And of course, the normalization agreements between Israel and the Emirates and Bahrain, which is in very much contrary to the interest of Iran. And the last event of the assassination of Fakhrizadeh, as was called by the BBC, the Soleimani of the military nuclear project. In spite of all these difficulties that I have mentioned, the nuclear program has continued and advanced, and Iran is even threatening to escalate its steps in the nuclear field. The embargo on the conventional arms was removed, and Iran's presence in the Middle East continued to be one not reduced, but one that threatens its neighbors. So let me now, on this background, present the participants of our panel according to alphabetic order. I'll start with Dr. Ebtessam El-Katabi, President of the Emirate Policy Center, Ambassador Rodriguez Bohen, Deputy Commissioner for the Disarmament and Arms Control in the German Federal Foreign Office, Brigadier General Udi Dekel, Managing Director of the Institute for National Security Studies, Mr. Zohar Palti, Head of the Political Military Bureau of Israeli Ministry of Defense, Mr. Norman Rule, former National Intelligence Manager for Iran at the Office of the Director of the National Intelligence in the US, and Dr. Sanam Vakil, Deputy Director and Senior Research Fellow, Middle East and North Africa Program, Chatham House, London. We'll start with the first round that every one of you, each of you will present between 7 to 10 minutes your perspective on the main issues to be addressed in the coming year related to Iran. I want to suggest that we start with the three circles we have. We'll start with the circle that is the global one, and we'll start with the US. Norman Rule, please.
There we are. Good afternoon, Seema, and greetings to you, Amos, and all my good Israeli friends and fellow panel members. For Iran, I think it's about to face an unprecedented period of transition that will touch every aspect of its leadership and the issues it faces. Domestically, Iran is facing a transition of power to a new generation of Islamic leadership, and Iran's political dynamic is going to reflect this in coming years. The presidential election in coming months is going to see the continued rise of leaders who were less influenced by Iran's revolution, but rather their personal experiences in the Iran-Iraq war and the experiences they have witnessed since 2003 in particular in terms of Iran's relationship with the region, the world, and its domestic situation. Iran's majlis, its ministries, and its commercial enterprises are now assaulted with former IRG senior officers who coordinate informally and formally at times on the way forward. I think the 81-year-old supreme leader is firmly in charge. There are no power centers to compete with him inside or outside of Iran, but his health continues to decline. His prostate cancer continues to exist, as we've seen even in the last weekend. And he has an architecture firmly in place, which will select someone very similar to him, but much younger. Most likely the 59-year-old Ebrahim Raisi, the 59-year-old Sadiq Larijani, or possibly, but I think unlikely, the 72-year-old Hassan Rouhani. Most of Iran's population was born since the revolution. They don't remember much of the Iran-Iraq war, and they only know an authoritarian government which is ossified and incapable of satisfying their standard of living requirements to the same level as Gulf neighbors. The old joke is, if Gulf leaders have Plan 2030 or Plan 2035, for Iranians, all they get is Plan 1979. The economy is in tatters, but I think its metrics, although unsustainable by certainly any Western government, are within the framework of what is tolerable by Iran in the near term. One exception to that is reserves. Iran's reserves are dramatically falling. Like any car, when it runs out of fuel, the car stops. It can be in bad condition, but if the engine continues to propel the car, it'll keep going until it runs out of gas. Reserves are Iran's gas. This is used to sustain a frail banking system. Obviously, it's currency, but it's imports. COVID has worsened all of this with extreme demands on its budget. Iran's protests within country, they continue to simmer, but there's no sign that they have yet to pull together into something that is genuinely going to threaten the regime. But it is clear that the protesters are united by anger against the entire spectrum of Iran's leadership. The protesters generally, they've had enough. And like everyone has had enough, they want more. But what they want, I think, is unclear even to themselves. I'll move to the international picture. The Biden administration has made it clear they'll return to the deal if Iran assumes full compliance. But as your previous speaker stated, I think this is going to be complicated for the United States, for Iran, for Europe, and others. But managing this return to the deal will be critical to Iran's ability to survive in the midterm. The Israeli acquisition of Iran's nuclear archive, the U.S. killing of Qasem Soleimani, the killing of Abu Muhammad al-Masri, the al-Qaeda #2 in Tehran, and the recent killing of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh has sent a powerful message to the Iranians. They certainly must think that at this point, there is nothing secret in their country. There is no individual, no matter how well protected, that cannot be surgically removed by its adversaries. And that's a new dynamic for Iran's leadership. And I think as they plan their response to this recent event, they're going to take that into consideration. The P5 is fragmented, but frankly, in fairness, I'm not sure the coalition existed during JCPOA as an entity that was willing to push back against Iran in the region or Iran's missile program. Certainly the P5+1 was united on the Iran nuclear agreement, but pushing back on Iran in Syria or Yemen or Iraq, I didn't see any evidence of that. I think the Biden administration will be able to restore P5+1 unity, but there's little to believe that this coalition is interested in pushing back on Iran in the region, although they will hold diplomatic negotiations to seek this. The best illustration is Russia has blocked any action against Iran in the United Nations Security Council since about 2011. There's no reason to believe that will change. I think China represents an opportunity for Iran and a strategic one, which I think it's going to seize simply because doing so provides a lever against future sanctions. But this will take a lot of work. Regionally, Iran has demonstrated that it can create and sustain militias, but it can't export good governance because it doesn't have that to export. Therefore, for Iran, they've got to spend in the near term their effort to solidify the political influence of these militias in a post-conflict environment. So let me close with two quick points, Iran's near-term goals. End sanctions and the rise of new sanctions, which I think will be fairly easy, and then obtain initial financial relief, because this financial relief will do two things. First, ending sanctions means they will have the potential of gaining access to their foreign reserves, their foreign financial holdings, and any financial relief, perhaps in terms of a COVID payment, will bolster reserves, restore national confidence in the regime before elections, and hardliners will be able to say that their actions and refusal to compromise provide them with victory. Iran will want the U.S. to return to the JCPOA, but only after it believes that doing so can be done in a way that the U.S. will not be able to easily bring snapback of sanctions into the picture, and perhaps with guarantees or some way of ensuring that a future Trump administration won't be able to repeat its actions. I think Iran will engage in long-term negotiations, because long-term negotiations tend to wear out big powers by small powers, and they will attempt to acquire military technology in the terms of aircraft, mine technology, and missile technology. They're going to have to reassert deterrence for the recent killings and actions, but I think this will depend upon their capability and planning. And they'll want to seek an action plan to build a relationship with China, again, against U.S. sanctions. I'll close with three quick points. I think we ought to think wild cards, because much of what Iran is going through is predictable. People can have somewhat different views on these situations, but this is all fairly obvious analysis. But the wild cards would change this. And three wild cards come to mind. First, a catastrophic success of an Iranian missile attack in Saudi Arabia. What if a missile hit the American embassy, the British embassy, the King Salman's palace? That really reshuffles the deck of regional turbulence. Also, how Iran would respond to the Fakhrizadeh killing. Second, the incapacitation of Iran's supreme leader. To me, his death is, there's an architecture that produces a successor, but if he's incapacitated, that's different. And I could see his son in the IRGC perhaps putting together a council of sort to reassure to sustain their power. I think we ought to consider what that would mean. And finally, the failure of JCPOA in the next year or so could produce social unrest around the time of the election. I think the IRGC will work very hard to prevent that. I don't see that happening, but it's a possibility. Thank you.
We continue with the third circle, which is the global one, and we will talk now to, please, Ambassador Rodrigo Bowen from Germany, and then with Dr. Sana Makil from London. Please.
Yeah, I hope that everybody can hear and see me. Yeah. Thank you for having me at this important event. And I'm here in the German Foreign Ministry. I'm the Deputy Director General dealing with arms control and disarmament, non-proliferation issues, including Iran. And and I would like to lay out from a German, or rather European angle, how we look at Iran and the Iran policy in 2021 in terms of our proliferation goals. I mean, one thing is clear. Our overarching objective has been and remains that Iran must never be allowed to develop or acquire a nuclear weapon. And we negotiated the JCPOA with the conviction that it would contribute to building confidence in the exclusively peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program, as well as to international peace and security. And to be clear, our approach has always been that we need a robust verification regime to ascertain that the commitments agreed on are actually implemented. So the JCPOA is not about trust, it's about distrust. And the JCPOA coupled tight technical restrictions of the nuclear program with the world's strongest transparency regime in the nuclear field. So for us, the JCPOA remains the best and currently the only way to monitor and constrain Iran's nuclear program. We consider it a major achievement to have kept the JCPOA alive or afloat after the US withdrawal from the JCPOA in May 2018. And the agreement may be on life support, if I may say so at the moment, but it's not that. The E3 are committed to preserving the JCPOA and bringing Iran back to compliance with its nuclear-related commitments. Iran's nuclear program needs to be contained, that is clear, and there are better ways from our point of view to do this than through President Trump's maximum pressure approach. Under the maximum pressure approach, Iran has not come to the negotiating table. To the contrary, Iran expanded its nuclear program, and in terms of the nuclear non-proliferation risks, we are not in a better situation compared to the situation before the US withdrawal from the JCPOA. We have repeatedly stated that discarding the JCPOA without a better alternative at hand does not serve our security interests and non-proliferation goals. Iran's systematic reduction of compliance with key nuclear commitments undertaken since 2019 poses, of course, new challenges. And I wish to recall that Iran embarked on this policy in reaction to the US withdrawal from the JCPOA and the reimposition of US sanctions. We have carefully followed the statements by President-elect Biden on the JCPOA and a diplomatic path forward to address wider concerns with Iran. This policy outlines open up a concrete perspective for a joint Iran policy, if you will, based on a preserved JCPOA. The E3, Germany, France, and the UK are preparing for a phase of intensive diplomacy to support swift return by the US towards the JCPOA and towards full compliance by Iran, of course. Clearly, addressing our shared concerns vis-à-vis Iran will be much more effective if we join our forces and efforts. Of course, we are deeply concerned about the ongoing steps contrary to the JCPOA by Iran. Iran's recent announcement to the IAEA that it intends to install an additional 3 cascades of advanced centrifuges at the fuel enrichment plant in Natanz is a new step contrary to the JCPOA. And the law recently passed by the Iranian parliament, which has not yet entered into force, is a matter of deep concern. If implemented, it would substantially expand Iran's nuclear program and limit the IAEA monitoring access. These measures would be incompatible with the JCPOA and Iran's wider nuclear commitments, and we hope it will not come to this. In any case, we will judge Iran by its actions. Maybe one word on the wider issues, regional issues, ballistic missile program. As the E3 heads of state and government have repeatedly stated, we want to address wider concerns with Iran. The E3 want to negotiate a future framework for Iran's nuclear program based on the JCPOA. Moreover, we seek talks with Iran about its missile program, and we need to address Iran's problematic regional conduct, including regional transfers of destabilizing weapon systems. Of course, we understand there is a deep distrust on all sides in the region. A sustainable long-haul improvement of regional stability and security might need a more comprehensive approach to that involves dialogue, confidence, and security-building measures and steps towards transparency involving all main stakeholders, at least around the Gulf. We see that this would be rather ambitious, of course, but such a process would not be without precedent. As Europeans, we could support such an approach based on our own historical experience and lessons learned, for instance, the CSCE process. Yeah, that's it from my side for the moment. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much. It was important to hear the European side, and I would like to ask Dr. Sanam Vakil, please, if you can elaborate on the European as well as on other issues that you are willing to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sima. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you for the invitation. And of course, it's an honor to be on this panel with so many distinguished speakers. Happy to offer my observations of the opportunities and challenges for Iran in 2021. I think this is going to be a very monumental year for the Islamic Republic. Made more urgent, of course, by the economic issues that were referenced already by Norman Rule, which I strongly concur with. And I think, above all, within the Iranian political landscape, there is an acute awareness that with the election of the Biden administration, there are important opportunities and challenges for Iran in the forthcoming year. So let me break them apart, and then I will connect them back to the processes that I see unfolding with regards to the JCPOA and further discussions that might come to fruition, as was already discussed by Ambassador Rüdiger. In terms of opportunities, obviously the Iranian economy has experienced immense pressure from maximum pressure and sanctions. Development objectives have stagnated since 2012. The Iranian economy hasn't improved the standard of living for ordinary Iranians for a number of years now. Specifically, since the U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA, Iran has experienced a number of currency depreciation and by a number of various calculations, its currency has depreciated over 400%. It is also experiencing stagflation, with high inflation, inflationary pressures, and low growth. This is, of course, posing immense pressure on ordinary Iranians above all, but there are also other dynamics that are taking place inside Iran that are important to consider. We have the economic pressure, but what is also coming to light is very acute political competition between Iran's factional groups. Sir John Soares, earlier in the discussion, I think got it right by describing Iranian politics as complex. There is politics, as the Iranian government likes to say, to compare it to other countries in the region. There is political pressure, and they do have different views and objectives as to the direction of the country. And this is really what is coming to light now, now that the Biden administration is this sort of clear interlocutor for Iran and for the next 4 years. There was a period of factional unity under maximum pressure, but what we're seeing emerge is moderates around Iran's president, Rouhani, and the foreign minister really being heavily attacked for the weakness of the JCPOA, the economy, the inability to win further economic support from the international community. They have actually gained a lot of symbolic support from the E3, despite all of their criticism, particularly even from Iran's supreme leader towards the E3. They have very much benefited from having this E3 support Iran over the past a few years. But in this climate of increased pressure, you've seen Iran's parliament turn conservative. This is, I don't see parliamentary politics as hugely relevant in determining foreign policy, but of course it's reflective of wider trends within the Iranian political system. Parliamentary politics can of course reflect the growth of the conservative movement, hardline conservatives in particular, the emergence of young Iranian new generation leadership that Norm already referred to as well, that I concur with as being an important trend. And these individuals, of course, have a different worldview and different experiences, and they don't have as much interaction with the international community. So observing and engaging with that cohort of people, I think, is a really important exercise to understand how Iran is currently changing and what the debates and dynamics are in that context. So with the president being under serious attack and an Iranian election looming for June, it is expected that a conservative candidate will win the next election. And this is a challenge and an opportunity, depending on the perspective you look at. It's a challenge, of course, for anyone who is hoping to see more moderation or political change in Iran. It's an opportunity for conservatives and hardliners that are looking to reassert formal and informal control over the Iranian political establishment. This is sort of a return to 2005 moment. The last time that conservatives had monopoly over the formal and informal institutions was in that period, and they gradually took control over parliament at the same time. You might remember the inflammatory policies and confrontational rhetoric that emerged during the Ahmadinejad presidency. I'm not saying that this is going to be a repeat of 2005 on to 2013, but I'm just saying we should be mindful of those dynamics and be aware that the worldview of conservatives, and of course they're not homogenous, they're not united, is different, and they have a different strategic view of how Iran should be engaging with the international community and how they should be engaging regionally. They particularly think that the JCPOA has failed to protect the security and stability of the Islamic Republic, and conversely see Iran's regional policy as having shielded Iran from maximum pressure. And without that regional policy, they would not have been able to survive, build leverage, and push back through their own maximum resistance policy. These elections are also important because, as Norm also mentioned, the Supreme Leader is 81 years old. And having a unified faction dominating Iran's formal and informal institutions, protects for succession and transition should that emerge over the next 4 years or 8-year period. For the international community, obviously, this is very much a challenge. You most likely will be dealing with a whole new set of Iranian policymakers. These policymakers have been pressing the Rouhani administration, criticizing the Rouhani administration for their failures, but ultimately are looking to be in charge of the next round of international negotiations with the Biden administration and the remaining signatories of the JCPOA. They are right now, through the parliamentary legislation that was just passed, but also just through criticism in the press and very much degrading tactics against the president and the foreign minister, looking to discredit them and tie their hands to prevent any quick return to the JCPOA, as was suggested to be the intent of the Biden administration. Obviously, the Rouhani administration is seeking quick sanctions relief and hoping for a quick return to the JCPOA to build confidence and trust with the E3, with the Russians and the Chinese, to see that compliance can benefit the Iranian economy. But Iran's demand is and remains, and they've been relatively consistent, that the first step has to be mutual return to the JCPOA. This does not mean, and I think it's important to listen to what the Iranian leadership says, because they're quite clear and categorical that they're not willing to discuss other issues. They will be willing to discuss other issues once the hurdle of compliance for compliance comes underway. But by the time that process probably takes place, we will be in a transfer of power, and a new set of leaders will be at the helm of Iran. And it's in that framework where the more for more tough questions of JCPOA 2.0 missiles and regional issues will be discussed. And I also share the view of the earlier speaker, Sir John Soares, that regional issues and missiles are not going to be easily wrapped up in one quick second negotiation. I've just concluded a regional security project, and the paper is going to be published quite soon at Chatham House, based on interviews with a lot of experts and policymakers globally. And I think the consensus from our paper is that rather than engaging with Iran solely on these issues, the international community, and specifically the United States and Europe, should be taking the lead to break apart regional conflicts and deal with them separately. There's more of a probability of, by regionalizing the issues, at attaining compromises from the Islamic Republic on some of these steps. I'm going to stop here because I'm elaborating, but I do agree that these steps are going to require a lot of discipline, a lot of commitment, unity, particularly among the E3, and above all, it's going to be important that regional states buy into this process, become a party to this process, engage in all of these mini multilateral negotiations, and also be willing to offer compromises. I would say 41 years on from the Islamic Republic, it's time to recognize that the Islamic Republic is resilient. It might not be thriving, but it is proven to continuously survive. And that has to be processed in the region. How and why it survives can be discussed, I think, further on, but I'm of the view that maximum pressure and sanctions have emboldened hardliners, the Iranian deep state, and have bought us more Islamic Republic rather than less Islamic Republic. The deep state in Iran is suffocating the Iranian private sector, repressing civil society, and drowning out political debate within the political establishment. So I would strongly urge the international community, the E3, and regional states to consider the implication of more Islamic Republic rather than taking a different strategic approach to engaging Iran, one that would be multilateral, one that would involve carrots and sticks, but one that would also require everybody at the negotiating table to make some concessions and accept that regime change is just not going to happen. No matter how much people want it, no matter how many people talk about it, it still hasn't happened, and it's just actually causing so much instability around the Middle East. So time for a different strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have heard interesting views coming from what I'm calling the circle of the global arena. We will now transfer to the regional arena, and I will ask, please, Dr. Iftisam from Abu Dhabi to hear your way of looking on the issue. Thank you.
Yeah. Sima, thank you, and thanks for INSS for this invitation. Much of the talks on the Iranian issue currently is centered around the perception by various parties of the return to diplomacy. The more workable scenario than unsustainable status quo is to build on the 2015 nuclear deal. One of the good ways to achieve this end is to launch an initiative for regional dialogue. According to this process, all regional countries will be involved in negotiation with the goal of reaching a regional agreement under a US and UN auspices. However, it is quite important to make a distinction between two concepts in this regard: return to a nuclear deal and return to negotiations. It seems hard to understand the basic attitudes of both US and Iranian sides whenever we combine the two concepts together. On the Iranian side, official authorities in Tehran wish to see a US return to a nuclear deal in what they call it as a course correction and catch-up. On the US side, the overall opinions, however, are not far on easy and quick US return to the nuclear deal. Biden positions indicate that he will link the return of the US to the nuclear deal to some conditions to be met by Tehran. This is indicative of Biden's wish to reap the benefits of pressure exercised on Tehran by Trump and his administration with a view of forcing Iran to meet some obligations outside of the nuclear deal. This scenario is likely to be opposed by Tehran and its allies, who call on unconditional US return to the nuclear deal. All this might lead to a middle course scenario where the US announced the removal of some sanctions in return for Iran returns to the nuclear deal on condition that the latter accepts to enter into complementary negotiation to expand the 2015 deal. However, the principal obstacle to this scenario lies in the fact that Rouhani's government is considered a transnational one. In other words, this negotiation needs to be postponed until a new president comes to office in Iran, likely a hardliner, supported by IRGC. It shouldn't be hard for Biden to reach a temporary agreement by April 2021. However, reaching a border agreement with Iran would require Washington to wait first for the outcome of the Iranian presidential elections. In many ways, it would be better to reach a deal with likely hardline presidential successor to Rouhani. In other words, negotiating with Iran hardliner faction is tougher, but it's more likely to result in a broader and more sustainable agreement. A temporary deal while Rouhani is still president is something that Khamenei and Revolutionary Guards would have to accept simply because of the nearly unbearable pains of sanctions. Iran missile program is one of the key controversial issues between Tehran and the international community. Tehran uses its missile arsenal to counterbalance its regional rival with more advanced military capabilities. It can be argued that Tehran missile program is basically designed for regional purposes, as Tehran missile force in its European side. However, it sends a message of potential threat to Europe. Tehran's seemingly successful scheme in this regard is designed to affect the European position on Iran's question. EU main concern is to keep the threat of Iranian missiles away from European capital, as some European capital may look at Iran's endeavor to develop a ballistic missile with shorter range as sovereign right. This argument, however, does not consider the security concern of Middle Eastern nations as Iran missile arsenal, which predominantly consists of missile system with medium and even short range, can threaten the security of all regional countries. This might seem to be tolerable from European and international viewpoints. I mean, we feel the heat. Therefore, the situation highlights the need for regional negotiations on Iran's missile program, which should focus on the map of Iranian missile bases, as well as the number and ranges of these missile systems to address the security concerns of regional countries. Iran has proved its ability to supply its various regional proxies with missiles of short and medium ranges, including those in Yemen, Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria. This fact will require all regional countries to join ranks and work together to establish common vision with regards to Iran missile program. This has also demonstrated the necessity to pay more attention to the creation of a common regional global vision regarding the risk associated with Iran's missile arsenal that should take the concerns of all stakeholders into account, not only one account. Thank you.
Of the first round to Israel, of course, and I would like to call Mr. Zohar Palti to represent his understanding of the situation, as well as, if he can allow, to the Israeli position. Thank you, Zohar.
Great to be over here, Sima. Thank you so much for inviting me. Great to see some old friends and comrades over here on the tiny screens right here. I will try to tackle this issue from a different angle. First of all, it seems to me that Iranians are coming to 2021 to a Middle East that I'm not sure that they know. The most important development occurred a couple of months ago, thanks to the Americans and thanks to the Emiratis and the fact that we are having these issues right now. Emiratis and Israeli in the same, let's say, video conference show that the region and the world is changing in the way that I'm not sure that Iran anticipate this issue a couple of, let's say, months ago. And it's good for that. And this is an outstanding development. After 26 years, we have another two-piece with two great Arab countries like the Emiratis and the Bahrainis, and with normalizations with the Sudanis. And it's not the end of the world as all of us hope. And this is, it seems to me, the most important strategic development that happened, as I said, in the last decades at least. Meaning, when you wake up right now in the morning, you see a lot of moderate countries. Most of them are good friends and relying on the United States of America, bipartisan. A lot of them in the Gulf states. Other ones, it's two important countries for us, vital to our national security, like Egypt and like Jordan. and with the help of other countries that we are less right now on the open with them, but they are also on the same side with us regarding the Iranian threat. And this it seems to me a new dimension over here in the Middle East. If I'm trying right now to see what is all the dots that combine all of us together regarding the Iranian issue, I can see that the Iranians are destabilizing and playing an unconstructive role, even a dangerous one, in 5 arenas. The first one, the pursuit of the military and nuclear program that they have, is the third that they are trying to get the military and nuclear program. And it's unacceptable by the international community. The P5, all of them, included the Russians, included the E3, of course, leading by the United States, are against this issue. The second issue, of course, is the ICBM, that's the surface-to-surface missiles. And my colleague just 5 minutes ago just emphasized the threat of the missiles. And no doubt that Iran will continue to develop ICBMs against Europe, against the United States, investing a lot in surface-to-surface, the accuracy, what we call the PGMs, pushing dozens of thousands of weapons to Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen, and other places to destabilizing the region. Third, it's all the regional Malayan activity. And they are, as I mentioned before, trying to challenge the Americans in Iraq and, of course, the coalition forces over there from the green zones. They're doing the same issues in the last 3-4 years in Yemen with the Houthis. And as Noam, that no doubt that he is the master in these issues, used to say before, he used this term, if I remember correctly, wildcard regarding September 14 attack on Aramco. I will call it, I think it's a game changer against the Iranians in a way. It was a wake-up call for so many countries that saw what the capabilities of the Iranians over here regarding cruise missiles and UAVs and the damage that they've done to the Saudis without any provocations over here. And in a way, it was a double-edged sword for the Iranians by doing this attack. The next issue, of course, is a terror activity that the Iranians continue to push all over. And only the Europeans and my colleagues in Germany can testify about the last year activity, terrorist activity that are doing on European soil. And the fifth issue is the human rights violation that they're doing like every day. Most of those subjects, as I judge it, are bipartisan in the United States of America. And as I know the Americans, this administration, the previous administration, and a lot of people that we probably know from the next administration, all these 5 issues that they're running are dealing, it seems to me that there is a consensus not to, let's say, to accept none of this behavior of the Iranians for 2021. I will add to that some other issues. First of all, there is much more awareness that there was some faults regarding the JCPOA. And I hope that some people will come over here from the Europeans and also from the American side and will remember carefully what we, the Israelis, used to say in 2012, 2013, before the JCPOA. And it seems to me that we have to learn some lessons. First of all, not to give up the sanctions 5 minutes before we start the negotiations. The sanctions are so important. This is an outstanding tool. Obama administration used it in 2012 and 13 have done an excellent job. Trump administration have done an outstanding job in the last 2 years regarding this issue. It seems to me that this is a vital tool, that it's so important to keep it, even when we are approaching 2021. Let's not give up nothing in order to compromise with the Iranians regarding nothing regarding these issues. This is one. The other issue, there is much more awareness, as I mentioned before, regarding the ICBMs and the surface-to-surface missiles. I'm including that. The UAVs, I'm including that. The cruise missiles. And over here, we haven't dealt with this issue, meaning the international community for them in 2013 and 15, both of their agreements, the intermediate one and the final one, was out of the question to talk about those issues. And of course, the regional issue. The regional issue, just look about what the Houthis and what the Iranians are doing right now to the Saudis or to the other Gulf states. This is something that are shaking the region over here. And it's unconstructive, and somebody have to deal with these issues. I think that over here, there will be kind of a pressure. I think it's not real pressure. I'm just reading so many people that are talking about it regarding the Iranian elections. The Iranian election for the presidency, it's a game, it's a charade, it's not real, it's not a democratic. The leader eventually will approve all the candidates. There's not going to be any figure that will come with, let's say, new ideas, reformic ideas, what we call. There is not real reformic. I still remember the picture of Ayatollah Khomeini, that over his lap on the two sides sitting one Khomeini and the other one who used to be Rouhani. Same school, same familia, same ideology. It's just the bad cop and the good cop. Over here, it will remain the same. I don't see this as any dramatic change in Iran in the next half a year. They're going to be very determined. We know the Iranians. They're not going to compromise about nothing. And I suggest that all of us will come in a very, very professional way to 2021 without a lot of expectation. On the contrary, to be firm regarding the fact to prevent from the Iranians any advance program regarding nuclear, regarding missiles, regarding all the terror activities they are doing. And over here, we have to be united. And I'm coming in a very optimistic approach to 2021 when I look how the region right now is working in more, let's say, coordinating way, and of course, the international community. Thank you.
And could I please invite Udi Dekel to elaborate on the Israeli perspective, regional and others. Please, Udi.
Okay. Good afternoon. I hope that you can hear me because it was difficult to hear Zohar. And I would like to proceed from the points which Ibtissam and Zohar started to speak about the regional activity of Iran. And I have a feeling that after the discussions and discussions with many others, that there is two wrong approaches. One main wrong approach that we can play back 4 years, 5 years, and start from the beginning. I tried so many years to develop this kind of ability to play back and to start from the beginning, but I didn't succeed yet to do that. So I not believe that somebody can do that. And we cannot go back to the 5 years back to the JCPOA and 5 years back. What about the 5 years back about the missile project? And what about 5 years back when we speak about the regional activity and when we speak about the consolidation in Syria and in our, what we call our northern arena? And for us, northern arena, it's not only Syria, it's also Lebanon, as somebody said before. It's Syria, and it's also Western Iraq, which Iran built up its, what we call in our language, I'm sorry about our language, the war machine, and Zohar mentioned some of those capabilities in order to attack Israel. And they proceed in that activity. They didn't stop. But I would like to say another things about wrong perception about the outcome of the maximum pressure. I know many people against the maximum pressure, but we can see some of the results of the maximum pressure. First of all, Iran slowed down its activity, especially when we speak about our northern arena, in building up this, what we call the military or the war machine against us. Of course, some of those, because of our activity and strikes, in order to prevent them from building up the military capabilities that they can use them against Israel. But also because they don't have enough money to pay for all of those people. You know, in the Middle East, if you have money, you can achieve support of people and you can push them even to do terrible things like terror attacks and other things. And the maximum pressure didn't give the Iranian the ability to implement their big plan. And we have to think about their big plan. I know that they are determined and they are not give up and they are looking at the, let's say, the full quarter of the glass, okay, not about the the half empty of the glass, and they determined to proceed. They have time, and they will try to do the things. So when we speak about our northern arena, we can see that now the main focus and the main investments is into build up the Iranian consolidation in Syria in something like 5 pillars. First of all, economy. They would like, we can see a lot of projects, telecom markets, transportation, real estate. I don't have time to speak about it. Second, demographic. They try to convince people, Shiite people, Shiite family of the Shiite militias to settle in Syria in the main strategic points which will create the land bridge for the Iran, or the control over the land bridge in Iran. Third, they are focusing a lot in building up a lot of some kind of internal security forces. The term in Syria is local national defense forces, which they train them, they give them equipment, money, and they try to use them. One day they can use them even against Israel. And we can see a lot of activity of their sources now in the southern Syria, because they would like to create along the border in the Golan Heights, area of friction with Israel, to keep Israel busy along of our border in the Golan Heights, that we will not have time to think or even to develop or implement any activity directly against Iran. And other things which they try to convince people to work with them, and in order to get some benefits that they cannot get from the Assad regime in Syria. So when we look upon the coming months, I can say that even Iran facing a lot of challenges along its what we call axis coalition from Tehran, Baghdad, Damascus, Beirut, and even trying to go out to the Mediterranean. They don't want to arrive until last week, at least, to any kind of confrontation or war situation with Israel, because this is not the time. They don't have enough power, and as I said before, this is one of the outcomes of the maximum pressure upon them. But we have to look upon 3 main trends that we have to take into consideration, which can change the reality when we speak about our Israeli northern arena. First of all, maybe the intention of the administration, the new administration, to pull out the American forces from Iraq and then from Syria. By that, it will open the land bridge for Iran, that they can of course develop, and the deployment and supply military needs and equipment along that bridge to those proxies which are operating by the Iranian, which this is a big issue for us. Today, the American small the deployment in the eastern side of Syria give or don't give the Iranian the freedom of action in that area. And if they pull out, then Iran will take over that area, which is strategic area for them along the border and the eastern side of Syria, Deir ez-Zor, of course, the area of the energy and things like that. So this is one issue which we have to be ready for that. And the second trend, it is the trend of the relief of the maximum pressure, as I said before. And somebody believed, which by that, I know that the maximum pressure didn't achieve the goals of change regime in Iran, or even changing the policy of the regime, or regime change. But there is a lot of, as I said before, positive benefits upon the Iranian ability to fulfill and to implement its activity all over the Middle East. And before doing something with Iran, before trying to negotiate with Iran or changing the policy of Iran, I'm afraid of that somebody will believe that by relieve the pressure, Iran will behave nice. Iran is not part of the solution. Iran is the main problem. And one of the things that we have to take into consideration when you speak about Israel, that maybe in the end of the story, it will leave us alone in the campaign against Iran, military building up in consolidation in the northern arena. And I hope that when we speak about the nuclear, we will have some friends which will understand that this is not only the problem of Israel, this is the problem of the region, and the problem more than that, as a problem of the global. Thank you.
And I want now to change a little bit from what I have wrote to you and to try and ask some questions each of you, because I think it was a very stimulating presentations, and I find some common views, but I found also some differences. And let me just in a very random way ask some of you some questions. I will start, because Udi was the last one, I want to start with the Israeli side, and I want to push for two major issues. One, I would ask Zohar, please. How would you configure the threats that Israel perceived coming from Iran, and what would you put as a major, the first one, the first priority? And do you think there is a possibility to handle the whole picture together? I mean, nuclear, missiles, and regional. Or if you think that we are not able to do it, would you prioritize it?
First of all, we are doing it. We are doing it for so many years. Now, whether we can do everything alone, the answer is no. We need friends for that. And over here, we have the biggest friends and allies, the United States of America, the people, and the administration, the Congress, the media. Everybody is with us regarding these issues. And with the strategic back of the Americans, when you have support in the Congress, both of the House, majority, significant one, that back up the Israelis regarding the threats, meaning mainly Iran, and the fact that the Americans are saying that they are not going to accept any military capability of the Iranians, this is something big. And when the Americans are deploying all over the Middle East, in Iraq and in Syria and in Lebanon, and helping our friends in the Gulfies, in Yemen, and all these issues, it's important. So over here, this is a very important pillar in our national strategy, to rely on the support of the United States and to work with friends. Moving to Europe, even they three, regarding these issues, eventually they don't want to see any Iranians capabilities regarding the nuclear, or of course also the regional activity. So that's with friends. Alone, as you know, we are a powerful country, and again, with the support of the Americans, with the best equipment that we are getting over here, and the most important equipment that we have is our boys and our girls, that they are in the cockpit, they are in the Navy, they are in the infantry, and they are doing the job. We are doing the job in order to do it. And we are doing it in the last 3 decades. I'm almost 4 decades in the service, but in the last 4 service, we're doing it from time to time in Lebanon if we need it. We are doing it, of course, in courtesy visiting from time to time in the Levant. And we have a history at 81 with Iraq. We have a history in 2007 in Syria. And if, God forbid, we will need to do it again, we will protect our countries. We are willing to do it. Hopefully, and with the help of the friends, we are not going to do it because the world and the international community, and I think that Udi is so right regarding this issue, will help us to prevent it, but without giving up nothing to the Iranian regarding this issue. if I try to prioritize, no doubt, that to prevent Iran to maintain any capabilities regarding the nuclear, this is the first capabilities, all the PGMs issues that I was referring before, all over the Middle East. That is referring also to our friends, but also, of course, to our families over here in Israel. We have another outstanding capabilities. This is the BMDs, the missile defense, and over here the Congress is so generous by helping us with $500 million a year just to develop our outstanding capabilities, and we will invest in those issues also to protect, meaning defense and offense. This is part of our national strategy over here. And of course, you know, what we are calling more in the grass regarding terrorism and things like that, that we will have to continue to do these issues because there are so many bad guys over here in the region that are trying to destabilize the security over here. We feel pretty confident that we're able to do it. As I mentioned before, with a lot of help from good friends. And over here, it seems to me, and I was referring it before, that the courageous act of the leadership of the Emiratis and the Bahrainis, this is an outstanding development that will help us to deal with all these challenges simultaneously. And it's so important that some other countries in the Gulf will join them as soon as possible, if I can add.
See, I started this round with the local parties, and I do want to ask, please, Dr. Ebtissam, two questions that are connected to each other. You have a very good understanding of the position of the Gulf states and of course of Saudi Arabia, Emirates and others. In the last days I have read an interview with the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia that has been saying that the Biden administration has to consult the regional parties in the Gulf and as well as others, probably mentioning Israel, and that the JCPOA was an agreement for a short period, didn't deal with missiles, as everybody here has mentioned also, and with the proliferation to the proxies of Iran in the region, and in a way I would say was very similar to what we have heard from the Prime Minister in Israel. And my big question will be here, is there a possibility, I would say, of a common position regarding the Biden administration and the Congress, which is very important, of the Gulf states and Israel? Because I have to say, and here I would put a point of a short question of a problem that I do see. There is a vast interest of Saudi Arabia, of the Emirates, of others, of good relations, on one hand, of good relations with Congress, because there are a lot of issues that are on the table. On the other hand, my impression is that since you are so close to Iran, and so, since you are threatened by Iran the way that we saw in the last years, there is a tendency not to get into a too difficult, I would say, conflict, not to say a military one, of course. So do you see a possibility in these circumstances to see a common and a mutual approach of Israel and the Gulf states vis-a-vis the Biden administration? We don't hear you.
What was missing, Sima, and the first nuclear deal, that we were not on the table. Not us as a GCC, neither Israel. We were not there, and it was only put the threat and only on the nuclear capabilities. Neglecting the ballistic missiles, neglecting the regional activities of Iran, the proxies, all the other things which we considered more dangerous for us. Reaching a consensus between GCC, it's hard. Now it's hard. We have that rift. We have, each country has its own concern. Like Oman, it has independent foreign policy, and it has its concern being very near to Iran. There is Kuwait also, which is near to Iraq and near to the boxes from Iranian boxes in Iraq. So each one of them, but all of them, of course, they are sharing the same perception of a threat of Iranian activities in the region and missile. How can we bring this to Biden administration? I think we have to work hard. When I'm talking we as a think tank, okay? We are policy-oriented think tanks here, and this should be presented before Biden coming to the White House in a way that it is, we are not opposing, but convincing that not only Biden, the European also should share the same perspective, that it's not, because the weakness point here, sorry, we have the German representative here, but I would say that the French and the German perspective towards Iran, that they don't see the threat we are seeing. I am not talking about that a war. I am talking about a regional security, regional structure, which can be involve everybody, but not only one view, which is only Iranian hegemonic view. We should be sitting on the table on an equal basis, because we all share this. We are here in the Gulf, and Iranian activities, it's reached even to North Africa. You find them everywhere. So if you want to live in peace, and this should be presented to Biden, because the main goal for Obama's administration in achieving that deal, that they will have this deal in the region and they will leave, and the region, the Gulf, will live in peace, which is totally was wrong. It did not happen, and that's why when they changed their strategic assessment to the region and pivoting towards Asia, thinking that things will be solved itself by itself, which it did not. Here you need really to understand the region, understand their concerns, GCC concerns, Israeli concerns, everybody concerns here, and we cannot let these proxies and militias destabilizing the region, destabilizing the security in the region, the stability in the region, with all respect what you said, Sana, but I think, as Zoha said, the maximum pressure, it achieved that it weakened Iran from using, Iran is not powerful like before because of that maximum pressure of sanction of Obama's administration, and it's weakening that, drying the resources of IRGC, weakening the proxies, weakening its proxies in Lebanon and Yemen in terms of their ability to acquire more missiles or more military action. So it should be on parallel, because lifting the sanction, lifting the pressure from Iran, we will go to the 0 point.
Very much, Ibtisam. I think you have expressed in a wonderful way the gap between how the regional partners see the situation and how the more global parties, and we'll come later in a minute also to the American parties, how they see the situation. I want to close the regional parties by posing a question to Udi, and then we'll go to the global partners that we have here. And I want to ask you a very concrete question. There is in the last year and in our institute rethinking about the situation in Syria and the possibility of doing anything that might change the reality. And there is those that are thinking that only without Bashar Assad there will be any possibility for a change, and the change that might change the Middle East, not only Syria, but also the possibility of Iran to go to support Hezbollah, etc. Do you think on this issue, first of all, what do you think about this issue? And secondly, do you think this issue could be a common interest between and a common understanding between us and the new Biden administration?
Okay. Do you hear me? Okay. And we believe now, Israel have a policy, not intervention really in the civil war in Syria. I know that somebody in the West don't call it civil war, but this is a civil war. And we decided only to operate if there is any imminent threat or there is delivery of weapon system by Iran, and the Iranian, as I spoke before, consolidation, especially by military capabilities. And the idea was that the devil that we know, it's better than the other. And I'm not sure that this is the situation now, because Assad opened the door for Iran. Assad gave Iran and Hezbollah the freedom of action in Syria to do whatever they would like to do, and don't try even to stop them from doing that things. Even we didn't speak about Russia, but Russia has some kind of competition with Iran about influence in Syria. We can see it very well now in southern Syria. And Assad sitting on the fence and give them the two, let's say, the two coalition, pro-Assad coalition member, Russia on one side and Iran in the same side or maybe other side, try to achieve more influence and more capabilities in that area. But Iran block any positive intention to change the reality in Syria, because they don't want any reforms. They don't want any kind of agreement between the rebels and the opposition and Assad regime, and they don't give anybody the ability to bring something positive, because nobody is going to invest in Syria if there is fighting there and there is the activity of the Iranians and the activity of other extreme organizations. So we believe now that maybe for Syria and for the future of the region, it's better without Assad, not with Assad, without Assad, because Assad brought Iran and Assad killed almost 500,000 people, his civilians, and he cannot stay in his position. This kind of person cannot be the leader of Syria. So maybe we have to take some kind of risk, because we don't see any other, let's say, address that we can say that it will be responsible, effective function, accountable for each people and other things. But I assume that it can create some positive trends inside Syria, which will bring another person, another group, another party, never mind the world, to control Syria. Or there is other option, which the Russians spoke about it, and this is the option that to create some kind of federation, not centralized, but decentralization of Syria. And we can see now in the, for example, in the southern part of Syria, there is internal forces that from our point of view, from Israeli point of view, they are more, let's say, positive than the other options. This is the people which live there, and they would like to control that area. And we can assist them, not only humanitarian, we can assist them that they will be able to control that area. So even Russia spoke about that. Nobody speak with Russia. And when I speak about the next administration, I know that they don't like it. But in Syria, Russia and the US can achieve common interests and common goal, especially to stabilize the situation, to try to push Iran from Syria, to push out Iran from Syria, especially when you speak about the military capabilities, and maybe to try to create something positive there for the people of Syria. So nobody spoke about the Russians. The Russians are a key actors, not only in Syria, they are also key actors vis-a-vis Iran. And they are not going to confrontation with Iran, of course, but we can achieve some of the goals by the Russians to start with Syria, to start in some of the areas in order that Russia will bring something positive, and by that develop another trend. And I assume that this is something that we have to try even, to see, because you never know the outcome. And when you come with game changer, you don't know really what will be the results, but you know that it will change the trends. And we have to try to change the trends.
Thank you very much, Udi. I asked this question, and before I turn some questions to our colleagues from the US and from Germany and London, I want you to think, and if you can also relate to that when you speak now, to the thinking of, because everybody is saying that it will be very difficult to go back to the JCPOA. Everybody understands that it will be, I would not say impossible, but very close to impossible to have a comprehensive agreement that includes missiles and regional issues and nuclear. So we are stuck in a way in the same situation we have been before. Is it possible to think out of the box of changing something in the region that will put Iran in a very severe strategic situation that will bring Iran to change its way of behavior, or to think differently, or to be willing to come to compromises that they are not willing today? So I was using this opportunity to put also a question of that. Let's think out of the box, because it looks that we are very stuck in a situation that most of us agree that is going to be very difficult. I want to Norman to ask you two different questions related, of course, to Iran. One is, I know you know quite well the Gulf states, and if you could say a word about the issue that I was asking also Dr. Ibtisam and myself, also relating to the Saudis, if you could say a word about that, and within the context, I would say, of the relation between the Biden administration and those countries. And the other question is, what do you think are the room of flexibility in the Biden administration position vis-a-vis Iran that can be a step forward in order to try and open negotiations and not just go back to the JCPOA and then start negotiations when Iran has got all the relief of sanctions?
Thank you. Well, I'll try to move through that quickly. So regarding the U.S. relationship with the Gulf, as the recent visit of Jared Kushner to the region demonstrates, this administration is fighting to the last moment to do what it can to press Gulf-related issues. Our partisan or hyper-partisan political discourse in the United States has tended to focus on specific issues regarding the Gulf. But if you are a serious security analyst, the issues of international transportation lanes, energy cooperation, cooperation against counter-extremism, cooperation against other regional issues, such as gaining Saudi Arabia's religious leadership to compel the Taliban to support women's rights in Afghanistan. I mean, these are the sorts of conversations that will take place between the United States and the Gulf. But there is a lot less interest in spending long-term energy in this area because we have climate change, the pandemic, the rise of China, the need to restore international cooperation in multilateral institutions that will take a lot of the Biden administration time. So the amount of energy they devote there is going to be limited. I think as you look upon the Biden administration with the Iranians, I think the problem is less that there is an ability to engage the Iranians. That's very easy. The United States has never had a problem talking to the Iranians since 1979. There have been multiple channels. We have permanent representatives at the United Nations who can speak to each other at any time. So discussions aren't a problem. The problem is the international community, and ironically, the Biden administration is seeking more multilateral cooperation, has no Iran policy. It's as we've seen today. If you want to think out of the box, the issue is to step away from JCPOA. We have a return to JCPOA policy, and as you've seen with some of the speakers today, we have no overall Iran policy. So stepping back and saying, what is a policy regarding Iran, and how do we then achieve it with representing the equities of the various players? Within the United States, you've probably routinely heard that the Trump administration was accused of disagreeing with our allies on Iran. That is true. The Germans, the French, the British, the European Union roundly criticized the Trump administration for leaving JCPOA. But what is equally true is, as we've seen today, the people who are most affected by Iran's action strongly supported what the United States did. And if we are to return to this European engagement, then how do we not abandon those in the region? And for those who say, well, we will talk about this, there tends to be a timeline associated with that of patience, which is quite different from those who are under threat. Within Europe, I haven't seen much action to push Iran back in the region over the last several years. Europe is traditionally not a coercive force. The United States is not going to be eager to get into that either, but that does leave the partners in the region and the hundreds of thousands of Americans who live there, as well as other nationalities, at risk of these issues. I want to close with 2 points that I think the Biden administration will touch on with the region. There has been much discussion of a regional conference. That's certainly reasonable. Iran has valid and serious rights in the region: commercial, economic, environmental, seismic issues, refugees, counter-narcotics. It's a long list. That's never really been a problem. The issue is going to be, how do you get the Quds force to not use all of this to simply buy time? And frankly, and respectfully to those there, the colleagues in Germany, Britain, and France will use a very different type of language. You will hear them say, we have issues with Iran. Iran has problematic behavior. We have disagreements with Iran. Usually people who are having missiles thrown at them and terrorism actions and people dying and stuck in forever wars, such as Israel mowing the lawn, they don't refer to that threat as an issue. But someone who's 2,000 miles away, who isn't very interested in making it a priority, will call it a problematic behavior that must be discussed in a long-term diplomatic discussion. So if you're looking for changing this dynamic, the dynamic is to step back, to say JCPOA is important. JCPOA shouldn't make us hostage to Iran, because they will say, if you put more pressure on us, we will leave JCPOA. Come up with real discussion points and involve the region. If that happens, you have a chance to bring Iran back into the international community and support the pragmatic conservatives within Iran themselves, who may want a better relationship with the West. But if that doesn't happen, Seema, we're stuck.
Thank you, Noam. It's very important what you said. Let me just put in a question now to Ambassador Rodriguez. I want to ask you, Germany is now the presidency of the EU. And the foreign minister of Germany in the last days have said that there is a need to have, and I'm trying to quote, there is a need to have an agreement, a new one, a broader one that will include the missile program, and that the JCPOA is no longer enough. I'm quoting. What could Germany and the EU contribute in order to have this, what the foreign minister has said, a broader agreement that is not only the JCPOA?
Yeah, I hope you can hear and see me again. Yeah, thank you for this question. The position of our government has actually not changed. The German government and also our E3 partners, France and Great Britain, have always been of the opinion that we need kind of a long-term future framework for Iran that goes beyond the JCPOA, but it's important to use the JCPOA as a basis, and therefore it's important to return to the fully implemented JCPOA as a first step to create or recreate also trust, and to start discussions on a more, let's say, forward-leading framework. Of course, I'd like to remind you that the JCPOA was designed and created in 2015 as a framework to contain the Iranian nuclear ambitions. It cannot be blamed for not solving each and every problem, especially in the region. And of course, we are concerned about the role that Iran plays in the region. We are concerned about the proliferation and transfer of missiles within the region by Iran. These are things that have to be addressed. But again, for us, the first step is to stabilize the situation by returning to the JCPOA and using the JCPOA as a basis for more. That's actually the strategy, and lots will depend on the new US government. But not only, we should not forget Iran, which is, of course, a major player in this JCPOA context. A lot will depend on the elections of the 18th of June next year. Because, I mean, it was said, I think, by Soha Palti that the Iranian leadership is all the same. They play a good cop and bad cop. But we think it makes a difference if whether you have a leader that follows the Rouhani approach, so to speak, which is a pro-dialogue approach, or whether you have a hardliner who would then try to limit diplomacy with the West to the bare minimum by fostering self-sufficiency and the so-called resistance economy. So I cannot predict what will happen during the next month, but we have to be prepared. And as I said at the beginning, we in Germany, together with our European colleagues, are preparing for an intensive phase of diplomacy. Thank you.
I want to apologize, but I want to press a little bit on you with a second question on that. Why should Iran go back to negotiations on missiles, on regional issues and other, if first of all we go back to the JCPOA, relief sanctions? Why should they talk to anyone? I mean, I don't want to say that once we continue with the pressure, with the economic pressure, they will come to the table to negotiate. I don't want to say it. They didn't do it until now. But why should they do it if everybody comes back to the JCPOA and gives them relief of sanctions?
Yeah, thank you. This touches upon the problem of leverage and incentives. And there are, of course, people who say that we leave the leverage once we return to the JCPOA. But we should not forget that the net of sanctions that the US imposed on Iran is extremely complex. And once we return to the JCPOA and lift the JCPOA related sanctions, I mean, if the US would lift the JCPOA related sanctions, that would not mean that all the sanctions would go. That would leave enough leverage and sanctions that could be used as incentives for Iran to also touch upon other issues that go beyond the current JCPOA. But again, it's not only about pressure. We also should look, as it was said by others, to the region, to the possibility of creating kind of a regional format, kind of a conference regime or whatsoever to create trust in the region, to use confidence building measures, transparency measures to ease tensions in the region. So it's not possible to solve each and every problem through pressure and through the JCPOA.
Thank you so much. And I want to now ask Dr. Sanam Akil, if you could say some words about what is the room of maneuver in Tehran. We know the demands coming from Iran, no opening of the agreement, compensation, relief of all sanctions. Do you think it is just opening a stand on negotiation, or is it a firm stand that will be followed by the current leadership as well as by the leadership that will be established after June, after the elections of June.
Thank you, Sima. I'm going to also weave in some thoughts based on some of the previous questions also, if you don't mind, because you wanted out-of-the-box thinking. And I think that if out-of-the-box thinking is going to take place, ideas like removing Assad is the most out-of-the-box thinking I've heard in this conversation today. So out-of-the-box thinking, I think, is sort of trying to create a sequence of discussions, dialogues, confidence-building measures that look to remove Iran from all of the regional conflicts that it has inserted itself into over a 41-year period. Expecting that a regional dialogue with Iran is going to result suddenly in Iran making magnanimous concessions on the scope and scale of its program, the range and extent of its ballistic missiles, its relationship with proxies, I think is really ambitious. It hasn't happened in the pre-JCPOA state, it hasn't happened during the JCPOA period, and it definitely hasn't happened through maximum pressure. I think also considering the climate in the United States, the pressure that the Biden administration will be under to address domestic issues and larger geopolitical issues, obviously, the commitment that the United States onus does fall on multilateral partners and the E3 to take a larger role in shepherding through those next steps, aligning their strategy, having a regional framework ready to go on day one. January 20th is imperative. Why? Because it can be an insurance plan for the Biden administration and assistance in Washington, but it can also be really important to, through coordination, backdoor negotiations in this period, work with Israelis, Emiratis, and Saudis who are being very rightly so concerned that another JCPOA will lead to an empowerment of Iran. Work with everyone during this period, bring all of the issues to the table, create consensus on a roadmap forward, and buy-in for future participation in all of these stepping stones that can be rolled out, and take that to the table on January 20th when the Biden administration reaches out. I think that is a space where we could create reassurances, focus on the JCPOA, and create parallel tracks, specifically on Yemen, building greater GCC unity, for example, and onward to the other issues. But it will require everybody's investment, not just waiting for the US to do it, and not just expecting the Iranians to randomly, out of the blue, make concessions, especially when hardliners are on the ascent and feel like that this is their moment and their opportunity to lead negotiations and leave their own mark. I think more specifically, opportunities in Iran, Iran's red lines are opening salvos. I think like everybody's red lines. Pompeo's 12 demands were red lines? No, they were opening points of discussion. And the way those 12 demands were written, it was very clear they were opening points of discussion. And the nuances of those negotiation points could have been broken apart and interpreted in many different ways. Iran is seeking JCPOA compliance for compliance as a first step. With that step, there will be, I imagine, difficult conversations, not just on sunsets and intentions for a JCPOA 2.0. There will be, and there should be, important discussions on human rights. There should be the issue of dual nationals that have been detained in Iran, and a commitment extracted from Iran to move on to their difficult regional issues. Iran does have an incentive to discuss those difficult regional issues because, as was pointed out, of course, the 1,800 US designations that have been imposed on the Iranian government through the course of the Trump administration are not all going to be removed. So going back to the status quo ante of 2015 is not in Iran's economic interest either. The JCPOA was also not delivering for Iran either. To address snapback and to insulate the JCPOA from partisan American politics also requires a follow-on negotiation. So the question is, what can be achieved? You do hear in track twos and back channel chats issues where there can be compromises. Obviously, ICBMs is the one that people toss around. I see regional ballistic missile constraints as another one that can be achieved. I think Iran is going to ask everyone to regionalize all of the portfolios as a face-saving mechanism. So that's why I keep sort of turning the mirror around and asking regional states to consider what's on the table for their positions. I don't have those answers, and that's the reality. It requires everyone sitting around and sort of brainstorming, airing grievances, and getting to the red lines. But currently, it's very unclear what everybody's red lines are. And I think, that is what really needs to come to the fore, be established, and those red lines cannot solely be zero sum. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Sanam. I want now, since we are in the last minutes before the conclusion remarks of Amos Yadlin, I want to give each of you 2 minutes to say something that you think that is related to what others have been saying or that you have not said before, and something that we can come out with as a bottom line. So please, let's start with Zohar. I think that he has to leave a little bit before, so let's start with you, Zohar.
Just one sentence. First of all, thank you again. And only one lesson we have to learn from 2013. Please come to us and talk with us 5 minutes before and not 5 minutes after. It will be much more beneficial for all of us to do this brainstorming and to hear the people that actually, as Noam used to phrase so well, are really concerned about the new developments over here. And it's so important to listen to us and to acknowledge the fact that something happened in the last 4 years. And it's not November 2016. Thank you.
We don't hear you.
She don't hear you.
Did you hear me, Dr. Ibtisam?
No, I didn't hear.
Okay, communication.
It's okay. Well, if there is something last I would say, and again, I will repeat that. For US and for the West as well, don't come with ready-made frame, okay? And try to put everybody fit in that. Okay, because each region and each country has socio-economic, political context which is different. Leave the people in the region. I mean, you negotiate with Iran and the other P5 without including the people in the region in that. That's why it did not work, and it will not work. Anything, if you are thinking about bringing peace to the region, making that security structure which can be stable and last, let us be between the people in the region to reach consensus. And you cannot let bullies put their conditions on the others. No more bullies in the region, because this is the region belongs to all of us, not only for Iranian, and you are 8,000 far away from us. So please, if you are coming to achieve security in the region, and it's not hit and run, security cannot be achieved in one day or one deal. It needs more and more dialogues and to understand each other.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Norman, can I give you the floor?
Thank you, Seema. I think there are two issues that override all of this. The first is the Iranian question is a question of collective security, international collective security. How we handle this issue will demonstrate the values and principles we have not only as an international community, but will show other adversaries around the world where our red lines are and how we handle things. It is imperative that those who are the victims of Iran's aggression have a loud voice in that discussion. And if you don't do that, then you risk that Russia might think we have less interest in protecting, say, in Estonia or China, Taiwan. And this has reactions in other locations. I think the second issue is that we all want to bring Iran back into the family of nations. We want Iran to play its responsible and historic role in the region. But in order to do this, there's got to be a demonstration that Iran's actions abroad do come at a cost. Engagement is not going to bring the Quds force to the table. Engagement will not bring the Quds force take the Quds force out of Lebanon, or this would have happened 30 years ago, and hoping that diplomatic discussions with Hezbollah will work hasn't really got us anywhere. Therefore, I close by saying that, again, in out-of-the-box thinking, an international effort to ban the Quds force, or seriously ban the Quds force and hold Iran accountable for its action might be the strongest evidence of our determination to punish Iran for hardline actions while attempting to bring Iran into the region for its traditional role. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norman. Could I please ask Ambassador Rodiger to say some concluding remarks?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to conclude by saying that I spoke today relatively often about the JCPOA and in favor of preserving the JCPOA because we as Germany think that the JCPOA is based on a multilateral framework. It's now, as I said at the beginning, is kind of on life support, but it's not that. And it has a lot of legitimacy through this multilateral support that it enjoyed, at least at the beginning, after 2015. And if we come to the problems in the region, I think there we also need kind of a multilateral framework that goes, of course, beyond the P5+1. It has to include all the players in the region, and I think this is the only way that could lead to a stable situation in the Gulf area by having kind of an inclusive approach to looking for a solution for the Gulf region. In this panel today, I saw a number of international experts, participants, also from Israel and from the UAE, which is kind of maybe not necessarily a first, but it's relatively new. And I think this is a source of optimism that we start to have kind of an inclusive approach. If we look at the region, and as I said, this maybe is the way that can lead to the future inclusivity by including all players of the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to ask Udi for two last sentences from your side, and then Sanam, if you want to elaborate more before you did, please. Udi.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I agree with Iftisam, and I believe that we need to establish an open strategic dialogue between the US, Europe, the region, that Israel and the region will be part of it. And it's very important in those days in order to achieve the common goals. And vis-a-vis Iran, as I see the picture, Iran use the damage power. This is the strategy of Iran, to destroy things which they don't believe that support of course, their interests. And it's very important to be determined and to use the same damage power against them, not give them the ability to build up the negative things that they would like to do, and to block their activities in the region, and not to, to be tired and say, okay, we don't have power anymore to deal with them. Yes, we need all the time to be determined and to engage with them in order to prevent them. And they don't want to respond against those which they believe that also can use the power against them. It's very easy to act from the Iranian point of view against those which will not respond. But if you are determined to respond and use your power again back to them, there will be more limitations in the Iranian activity in the region. Thank you.
To say something on the end of our round?
Very quickly, I'll just say, I think that there's relative consensus that... You can't hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? There's relative consensus that regional security should be a priority for whatever form of negotiations emerge with the Biden administration. I think here, what is one of my clear takeaways is that there also seems to be some consensus that we're going back to 2015, although everyone says the region has very much changed. The Biden administration, I think, is clearly aware of that, very mindful that this is a Biden administration, not an Obama 2.0 administration. And I think that above all, they will be engaging with regional actors. So I think this is an opportunity, not just for Iran, but also for all countries in the region to engage productively with the Biden administration, to be voices in the room, not just next door, and to think constructively and out of the box on regional security issues. That's what I think 2021 could be about. It's a question of whether Iran will be the spoiler, whether other countries are going to try to spoil the dynamics. But there are so many conflicts in the Middle East to date, more perhaps than we have ever seen. And I think it's time to draw these down, not necessarily perhaps for the political establishments, but really for the people. I mean, the suffering is at an all-time high, and next year in January, we're in the 10th year anniversary of the Arab Spring, with little progress in addressing the needs of ordinary citizens. So prioritizing people's concerns, I think, is also very much tied to regional security and state security. So thinking in those terms, I think, would be the most productive. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting and profound panel. And I want to transfer to concluding remarks of Amos Yadlin, please.
Thank you, Sima, very much for arranging this amazing and inspiring panel and event. I think the two parts of it were very important, and all the participants and those who watch us online have learned a lot. No doubt that we are in a crossing road. We are towards a crucial decision by all the players. And let me speak about 4 points that I think are the most important. First is whether we're going to deal with the nuclear issue or with the comprehensive Iranian behavior in the Middle East. My position is that if you want to achieve something, you better go on nuclear only with agreement, because this is the only existential threat and the most dangerous Iranian issue. We can cope with Iran Malenian activity if we decide to do it, if the Americans will decide to do it, if the Gulf state will decide to do it. We are strong enough to deal with Iran. We have proved it in Syria in the last couple of years. But nuclear issue is much more dangerous and should be dealt separately. In this respect, I'm still supporting this approach. Second, is it making sense? Is it wise to go back to the JCPOA? And here my answer is absolutely no. As one who was not against the 2015 agreement, but saw it as a problematic agreement, but not as a disaster. It has some advantages. The advantages already found, whether built on wrong assumptions or we lost the time of enjoying them. We are moving into the second part of JCPOA, which is very dangerous, because at the end, at the sunset, we will see legitimacy for a full-scale nuclear program for Iran, which is zero distance from the bomb. The assumptions that were found wrong are that the regime will behave differently, will use the money of lifting the sanction to improve standard of living in Iran. Unfortunately, we saw them becoming more aggressive in the region, and the assumptions that the agreement blocked all the streets, all the ways to nuclear weapon were found wrong as well. The R&D, the advanced R&D, and the fact that Fordo is open and Iran is now enriching there shows that you haven't blocked all the ways to the nuclear. And PMD, potential military dimension, which is the base for the agreement, found to be definite military activities, and it should be revisited. So you cannot bring back the clock to 2015, a new JCPOA 2.0. And when I spoke with a figure from the Gulf about it in Manama last weekend, say, I don't want JCPOA 2.0. I don't want to hear the combination JCPOA whatever. But what is really important is to close the loopholes in the old JCPOA. The next question is, are you gonna give the Iranians all the leverage that that the Trump administration created against them before you go back to negotiation? This is a big mistake in the negotiation course number 1. You are not giving back your leverage before the negotiation because you are not going to reach anything in the negotiation. Israel and the US, we are sharing the same goal, that Iran will not be nuclear. However, we have differences on the strategy how to achieve it. It was very clear during the Obama administration when we didn't agree on timing, we didn't agree on trigger, we didn't agree on the right alternative how to stop Iran. We do have to speak again on our differences and try to align them to a coherent strategy agreed by both. It is not easy, but we should try it. If Israel and the Gulf state will not be in a dialogue with the new administration about what are the red lines in agreement on one hand, and if the Iranians continue to move forward towards the nuclear threshold, what should we do? I think it is going again to be a very problematic deal, if deal will be achieved, because the Iranians are still having extreme positions that even those who want to go back to the JCPOA will find it problematic, because Iran is not complying and putting in the beginning of the negotiation a very hard position. It is going to be an interesting year. I don't think that anything will happen in the next 6 months. Not that the election in Iran are so important, because they are not replacing the supreme leader, they're replacing the president, and it will be more, I guess, radical president. But the next year, towards the second half, I think the Iranians as well as the Americans will finish their policy crafting, and together I think Israel, the Gulf, and the US should make sure that Iran will never reach a nuclear bomb on one hand, and to deal in a different channel against their malign activities by not repeating the mistake of the Obama administration, that because he wanted to keep the JCPOA alive, he didn't act against Iranian activities in the other channel. Thank you again, Sima. And good evening, everybody in this region, and I think still good morning in America.
Thank you very much to everyone for your participation. Thank you.